Case 1. Jovan Trevino. September 16, 2021 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. The call came into Henderson Police Department on a Thursday afternoon in mid-September 2021. A maintenance worker at an apartment complex had made a discovery that would haunt him forever. Two small children, unresponsive, in a bathtub filled with water. When first responders arrived at the Mountain View Apartments on East Lake Mead Parkway, they found 1-year-old Jace and 3-year-old Amira Trevino submerged. Despite immediate life-saving efforts, both children were pronounced deceased at the scene. The Henderson Fire Department worked desperately to revive them, but the children had been underwater too long. Their mother, 23-year-old Jovan Trevino, was present in the apartment. Her behavior immediately struck investigators as unusual. She appeared detached, providing inconsistent statements about what had occurred. As detectives from the Henderson Police Department Special Victims Unit began their investigation, the evidence they uncovered painted a devastating picture. Forensic examination revealed that both children had been forcibly drowned. This was not an accident, not a momentary lapse where a parent stepped away and tragedy struck. The evidence indicated a deliberate, sustained act. Medical examiners determined that both Jace and Amira had been held underwater until they stopped breathing. During interrogation, Trevino's story shifted multiple times. She initially claimed the children had been playing in the bath when she briefly left the room. When confronted with the physical evidence that contradicted this account, she offered different explanations. Investigators noted her flat effect, a disturbing absence of the grief and panic one would expect from a mother who had just lost both her babies. Neighbors began coming forward with information that added crucial context. Several reported hearing unusual sounds from the Trevino apartment in the days leading up to the children's deaths. Children crying for extended periods, sometimes late into the night. One neighbor recalled seeing Trevino in the parking lot the evening before the murders, describing her as seeming not herself, with a distant, vacant expression. The investigation revealed that Trevino had been experiencing significant personal difficulties. She had recently separated from the children's father and was struggling financially. Text messages recovered from her phone showed increasing frustration with the demands of single parenthood. In one message to a friend sent just days before the drownings, she wrote about feeling overwhelmed and trapped. But investigators found no evidence of psychosis or a complete break from reality that might explain, though never excuse, what had happened. Trevino understood the nature of her actions. She knew drowning her children would kill them. She did it anyway. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Jovan Trevino with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The charges carried potential death penalty specifications, given the victims were young children and there were multiple murders. Prosecutor Mark DiGiacomo presented the case to a grand jury, which returned indictments on all counts. At trial, the prosecution methodically built their case. They presented the physical evidence, the apartment layout, the bathtub where the children died, the autopsy findings showing drowning as cause of death with no signs of accidental submersion. They called the maintenance worker who discovered the children, his voice breaking as he described the scene. They presented the inconsistent statements Trevino had made to police. The defense faced a nearly impossible challenge. They argued that Trevino had been suffering from undiagnosed postpartum depression and other mental health conditions that had impaired her judgment. They brought in psychiatric experts who testified about the severe psychological toll of single parenthood, financial stress, and isolation. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. Mental health struggles, no matter how severe, did not explain the specific, deliberate actions Trevino had taken. She had filled a bathtub. She had placed her children in the water. She had held them under until they died. These were not the actions of someone in an unconscious state. They were the actions of someone making choices, however horrifically wrong those choices were. The jury deliberated for less than a full day. They returned with guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder. At sentencing, the prosecution asked for life without parole. They presented victim impact statements from the children's father and extended family members. The children's grandmother spoke through tears about Jace's laugh and Amira's love of singing. She described the hole in their family that would never be filled. The judge sentenced Jovan Trevino to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In his remarks from the bench, He noted the particular vulnerability of the victims and the betrayal of trust inherent in a mother killing her own children. Trevino would spend the rest of her life in prison. The Henderson community held vigils for Jace and Amira. Stuffed animals and flowers piled up outside the apartment complex where they died. The case sparked renewed conversation about resources for struggling parents and the importance of mental health support. Though everyone acknowledged that no support system could have prevented this tragedy if Trevino had not reached out for help. Jace Trevino was 1 year old. Amira Trevino was 3 years old. They should be alive today. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to True Crime Silent Files to help us continue bringing awareness to these important cases. Case 2. Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez. June 1, 2021 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. On the morning of May 28, 2021, a hiker on a trail near the Mountain Springs trailhead west of Las Vegas made a discovery that would launch one of the most intensive manhunts in recent Nevada history. Partially concealed off the trail was the body of a young boy. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department detectives responded to the scene in the rugged terrain between Las Vegas and Pahrump. The child appeared to be between 5 and 8 years old, but he carried no identification. His body showed signs of trauma. The location was remote, not a place a child would wander to on his own. The Clark County Coroner's Office worked to identify the victim while homicide detectives began the challenging task of investigating a murder when they didn't even know who had been killed. They released a composite sketch and description of the boy, hoping someone would recognize him. Meanwhile, in San Jose, California, a family was growing increasingly concerned. 7-year-old Liam Husted had not been seen since late May. His mother, 27-year-old Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez, had taken him from San Jose, telling family members they were going on a trip. But now both mother and son seemed to have vanished. Liam's father, who was not in a relationship with Moreno-Rodriguez but shared custody of their son, filed a missing person report with San Jose police. He provided photographs of Liam. When San Jose detectives saw the Las Vegas sketch of the unidentified boy, they immediately recognized the similarities. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. The boy found dead near Mountain Springs was Liam Husted. The case now had a victim identity and a prime suspect, his own mother. Security camera footage placed Moreno-Rodriguez and Liam in Las Vegas on May 27th and 28th. Cameras captured them at a Walgreens, where Moreno-Rodriguez purchased trash bags and cleaning supplies. The timestamp was just hours before Liam's estimated time of death. Cell phone records showed Moreno-Rodriguez's phone pinging off towers near the Mountain Springs area during the critical time window. After that, her phone began moving east, out of Nevada entirely. She was running. An Amber Alert was issued for Moreno-Rodriguez, and her photo was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the western United States. The FBI joined the investigation given the interstate nature of the case. Media coverage intensified. A mother had allegedly murdered her son and fled across state lines. The break came in Denver, Colorado. On June 9, 2021, nearly 2 weeks after Liam's body was discovered, Denver police officers located Moreno-Rodriguez at a hotel. She was taken into custody without incident and extradited back to Nevada to face charges. During interrogation, Moreno-Rodriguez initially denied involvement in Liam's death. But confronted with the overwhelming evidence, her presence in Las Vegas with Liam, the purchases she'd made, the cell phone data placing her at the crime scene, her story began to change. She eventually admitted to killing her son. The method was strangulation. She had used her hands to choke the life out of 7-year-old Liam. Her explanation for why she had done it was chilling in its banality. She claimed she was overwhelmed with parenting and wanted to start a new life. Liam, in her distorted thinking, was an obstacle to that new life. After killing him, she had placed his body in one of the trash bags she'd purchased, driven to the remote trailhead, and left him there. Then she had fled, apparently hoping to disappear and start over somewhere no one knew her. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez with first-degree murder with the use of a deadly weapon, in this case, her own hands. The charges reflected the premeditated nature of the crime. She had driven her son across state lines, purchased supplies, and carried out a planned killing. At trial, prosecutors presented a timeline that left no doubt about Moreno-Rodriguez's guilt. Security footage, cell phone records, witness statements, and her own confession formed an unbreakable chain of evidence. They argued this was not a crime of passion or a momentary loss of control. It was calculated murder. The defense attempted to argue that Moreno-Rodriguez had been suffering from severe mental health issues, including depression and anxiety related to the pressures of single parenting. They presented evidence that she had struggled financially and emotionally in the months before Liam's death. But as in the Trevino case, the prosecution successfully argued that mental health struggles, no matter how genuine, did not excuse or explain the specific, deliberate actions Moreno-Rodriguez had taken. She had made plans. She had driven to a different state. She had purchased supplies. She had carried out a murder. Then she had fled and attempted to evade capture. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. Victim impact statements at sentencing revealed the devastating effect of Liam's murder on his extended family. His father spoke about the vibrant, loving boy who had been taken from him. Liam loved dinosaurs and video games. He was doing well in second grade. He talked about wanting to be a paleontologist when he grew up. None of those dreams would ever come true because his mother had decided he was inconvenient to her plans for a new life. The judge sentenced Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never leave prison. She will never have the new life she apparently killed her son to achieve. In Las Vegas and San Jose, communities mourned a bright-eyed 7-year-old boy who died not from an accident or illness, but from a mother's selfish choice. Liam Husted's short life mattered. His death sparked conversations about custody arrangements, mental health resources for parents, and the importance of extended family staying vigilant for signs that a child might be at risk. If you found this case compelling and believe in the importance of documenting these tragedies to prevent future ones, please like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button for True Crime Silent Files. Your support helps us continue bringing you verified true crime cases with the respect and thoroughness they deserve. Case 3. Taylour Sierra Dickinson. February 7, 2021 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. In the pre-dawn hours of February 7, 2021, a maintenance worker at a commercial complex in the Sun Valley area of Las Vegas was starting his Sunday morning rounds. As he approached a dumpster behind a strip of businesses, he heard something that made him stop, a faint crying sound. At first, he thought it might be an animal, but something about the sound was distinctly human. He climbed up to look into the dumpster, and what he saw would haunt him forever, a newborn baby, naked and struggling for life among the trash. The worker immediately called 911. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police and paramedics responded within minutes. The infant, a baby girl, was hypothermic, her core body temperature dangerously low. She was covered in trash and debris. The umbilical cord was still attached, crudely torn rather than cut. She had been born very recently, possibly within the past few hours. Paramedics rushed the newborn to University Medical Center. Despite the exposure and abandonment, the baby survived. Doctors determined she was full-term and healthy. Her survival in that dumpster was nothing short of miraculous. Had the maintenance worker started his rounds even an hour later, the outcome would likely have been different. While medical staff worked to stabilize the infant, detectives from LVMPD's Crimes Against Children section began an investigation. Who had given birth to this baby and then thrown her away like garbage? In an era of safe haven laws, where parents can legally surrender newborns at hospitals and fire stations, no questions asked, why had someone chosen this cruel alternative? Security cameras in the commercial area provided crucial evidence. Footage from the early morning hours showed a vehicle pulling up near the dumpster. A young woman exited the vehicle, carried something to the dumpster, and deposited it inside. She then left quickly. The vehicle's license plate was partially visible. DMV records led detectives to 21-year-old Taylour Sierra Dickinson. When officers made contact with her at her residence, they observed signs consistent with recent childbirth. She appeared physically exhausted and had obvious postpartum indicators. When questioned about whether she had recently given birth, Dickinson initially denied it. But confronted with the evidence, she eventually admitted the truth. Dickinson stated she had given birth alone in her bathroom. She claimed she had not known she was pregnant, a statement that would later be disputed by evidence showing she had been researching pregnancy symptoms online for months. She said when the baby was born, she panicked. She didn't know what to do. So she wrapped the newborn in a plastic bag, drove to the commercial area, and threw her in the dumpster. She then went home and went to bed. The callousness of the act was staggering. This was not a frightened teenager hiding a pregnancy from strict parents. Dickinson was an adult woman with access to resources and options. Nevada has a safe haven law. She could have taken the baby to any hospital or fire station within 72 hours of birth, handed the infant to staff, and walked away without fear of prosecution. Instead, she chose to discard a living baby in a dumpster. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Dickinson with attempted murder and child abuse. The attempted murder charge reflected the fact that leaving a newborn in a dumpster in February, when overnight temperatures in Las Vegas can drop into the 40s, was an act likely to result in death. At trial, prosecutors presented the security footage, Dickinson's confession, and expert testimony about the baby's condition when found. Medical experts testified that the infant had been minutes to hours away from death when discovered. The hypothermia, combined with the trauma of being born and immediately abandoned, could easily have been fatal. The defense argued that Dickinson had been in a state of panic and mental distress related to an unplanned pregnancy. They presented evidence that she had come from a troubled background and lacked family support. They argued she should be convicted of lesser charges, child endangerment rather than attempted murder. The prosecution countered that Dickinson's actions were deliberate, not panicked. She had given birth, cleaned up, found a plastic bag, wrapped the baby, gotten in her car, driven to a location she selected, and disposed of the infant. These were a series of choices, not a single panicked reaction. At any point, she could have called 911. She could have driven to a hospital. She chose not to. The jury found Dickinson guilty of attempted murder and child abuse. At sentencing, the prosecution presented victim impact statements, including a statement from the baby's foster parents. The infant had been placed in foster care after her recovery, and an adoption was pending. They spoke about the healthy, happy baby girl who had survived an unimaginable start to life. They read a letter from the maintenance worker who had found her, describing how the sound of her cries still echoed in his mind. The judge sentenced Taylour Sierra Dickinson to 10 to 25 years in prison. In his remarks, he noted the particular cruelty of abandoning a newborn, a completely helpless human being entirely dependent on adult care. He also noted the existence of safe haven laws and expressed frustration that Dickinson had chosen not to use them. The baby girl, now known publicly only as Baby Emma, a name given to her by hospital staff, was adopted by a loving family. She will grow up knowing she survived something most people cannot imagine, saved by a maintenance worker who heard her cries and refused to ignore them. The Sun Valley community installed a small memorial near where baby Emma was found, a reminder of the importance of the safe haven law and the value of every infant's life. And please, leave a comment below, hit the like button, and subscribe to True Crime Silent Files so we can continue covering cases that need attention. Case 4, Crystal Stevens. April 9, 2019 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. On the morning of April 9, 2019, emergency responders in Las Vegas received a frantic call from a residence on the city's east side. A 4-year-old boy was unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, they found the child in critical condition, covered in bruises and marks that immediately raised red flags. The injuries were not consistent with a fall or accident. They appeared to be the result of sustained abuse. The boy, identified only in court documents as Yes to protect his identity, was rushed to Sunrise Hospital and Medical Center. Doctors worked desperately to save him, but his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. An autopsy would reveal he had suffered blunt force trauma to his head, abdomen, and extremities. He had broken bones in various stages of healing, indicating the abuse had been ongoing for weeks or months. This was torture. The adults in the home were the boy's mother, 26-year-old Crystal Stevens, and her boyfriend. Both were taken into custody for questioning. As detectives from LVMPD's homicide section began to piece together what had happened, they uncovered a pattern of abuse that shocked even veteran investigators. Yes was autistic, functioning at a developmental level below his chronological age. He required patience, structure, and specialized care. Instead, According to evidence gathered by investigators, he received brutal punishment for behaviors related to his disability. Witnesses who had visited the home told detectives they had seen ES with bruises and had heard Stevens and her boyfriend yelling at the child. One neighbor reported hearing screaming from the apartment on multiple occasions, but had assumed it was normal discipline. That assumption had proven tragically wrong. Forensic evidence from the apartment told a horrific story. Blood evidence indicated ES had been bleeding from injuries for some time before his death. Investigators found implements that appeared to have been used to strike the child, belts, wooden objects, and other items. Text messages between Stevens and her boyfriend showed both of them discussing their frustration with ES's behavior and their methods of punishing him. During interrogation, Stevens initially claimed ES had fallen and hurt himself. But confronted with the medical evidence, the pattern of injuries, the marks consistent with being struck with objects, the internal bleeding, she eventually admitted that both she and her boyfriend had physically disciplined the child. She attempted to minimize her role, claiming her boyfriend had been the primary aggressor. But evidence proved she had participated in the abuse and had failed to seek medical care for the child even as his condition deteriorated. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged both Crystal Stevens and her boyfriend with first-degree murder and child abuse resulting in substantial bodily harm. The charges reflected the prolonged nature of the abuse and the vulnerability of the victim. At trial, prosecutors presented medical testimony that left the jury visibly shaken. The medical examiner described injuries consistent with being beaten repeatedly over an extended period. ES had suffered, likely in terrible pain, for weeks before his death. And through it all, his mother, the person legally and morally responsible for protecting him, had not only failed to stop the abuse but had participated in it. Teachers from ES's early intervention program testified that the child had been sweet and affectionate despite his challenges. They had noticed bruises but had accepted Stevens's explanations that he bruised easily due to clumsiness. They expressed profound guilt that they had not pushed harder or reported their suspicions sooner. The defense attempted to argue that Stevens had herself been a victim, that her boyfriend had been abusive toward her, and she had feared for her own safety if she intervened to protect her son. But prosecutors presented evidence that Stevens had had multiple opportunities to leave, to seek help, or to report the abuse. She had chosen not to. Furthermore, text message evidence showed Stevens had initiated some of the abusive incidents and had expressed anger toward her son for his autistic behaviors he could not control. The jury found Crystal Stevens guilty on all counts. Victim impact statements at sentencing came from ES's father, who had not been involved in the child's life but spoke about his regret, and from extended family members. They spoke about a child who loved music and who would light up at certain songs. They spoke about his potential and the services that were being put in place to help him thrive. All of that had been stolen by the people who were supposed to care for him. The judge sentenced Crystal Stevens to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his sentencing remarks, he spoke about the particular vulnerability of children with disabilities and the trust society places in parents to care for those who cannot care for themselves. Stevens had betrayed that trust in the most horrific way possible. Her boyfriend received a similar sentence. The case led to renewed scrutiny of how Child Protective Services investigates reports of suspected abuse, particularly in cases involving children with special needs who may not be able to verbally report what is happening to them. ES's early intervention program implemented new protocols for documenting and reporting suspected abuse. ES was 4 years old. He was nonverbal and vulnerable, and the person who should have been his fiercest protector became his killer. Children with disabilities are at higher risk for abuse. If you work with special needs children and see signs of abuse, please report it. Please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this case. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Silent Files. Case 5, Kira McCall. August 23, 2022 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. The opioid epidemic has devastated communities across America, but some of its youngest victims never made a choice to use drugs. They were simply born to, or lived with, adults whose addiction placed them in mortal danger. On August 23, 2022, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police responded to a residence in the northeast part of the city for a report of an unresponsive child. When officers arrived, they found a toddler, 18 months old, who was not breathing. Narcan, the overdose reversal drug, was administered, but the child could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial investigation revealed that the child, identified in court documents as AM, lived with his mother, 24-year-old Kira McCall. The apartment was in disarray, with evidence of drug use readily visible. Detectives found pills scattered within reach of where a toddler would play, drug paraphernalia on counters and tables, and general conditions of neglect throughout the residence. An autopsy and toxicology report revealed the cause of death, fentanyl poisoning. The amount of fentanyl in AM's system was enough to kill an adult, let alone an 18-month-old child. The medical examiner determined the child had likely ingested fentanyl pills that had been left within his reach. Detectives from the Crimes Against Children section executed search warrants and began building a case. What they found painted a picture of a mother whose addiction had rendered her incapable of providing even basic care for her son. Neighbors reported seeing AM outside unsupervised on multiple occasions. One neighbor said she had found the toddler wandering in the apartment complex parking lot and had returned him to McCall, who had appeared disoriented and barely acknowledged the danger her son had been in. Another neighbor reported that AM often appeared dirty and hungry. Child Protective Services had an open case on the family. A CPS worker had visited the home 3 weeks before AM's death and had noted concerns about McCall's ability to care for her son. But the determination had been made that the child was not in immediate danger. A follow-up visit had been scheduled, but it came too late. Text messages recovered from McCall's phone showed her communicating with drug dealers and other users in the days and hours before her son's death. Even on the morning of August 23rd, she had been arranging to purchase pills. The evidence suggested that while her son lay dying, McCall had been focused on obtaining her next fix. During questioning, McCall claimed she had no idea how her son had been exposed to fentanyl. She suggested he might have found pills that had been dropped by a visitor to the apartment. But investigators easily disproved this claim. The pills found in the apartment were consistent with those recovered from her purse, and witnesses confirmed she had been the only adult in the home for the past 48 hours. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Kira McCall with second-degree murder and child abuse causing death. The second-degree murder charge reflected the fact that while McCall had not intended to kill her son, her reckless actions, leaving deadly drugs within reach of a toddler, showed a depraved indifference to human life. At trial, the prosecution presented evidence of McCall's extensive drug use and the deplorable conditions in which AM had lived. They showed photographs of the apartment, pills on the coffee table, syringes in the bathroom, spoiled food in the refrigerator, and a child's room with barely any toys but clear evidence of neglect. Toxicology experts testified about fentanyl's extreme potency, that a dose the size of a few grains of salt can be lethal. They explained that a child AM's age would not need to ingest many pills to receive a fatal dose. The pills in McCall's apartment were counterfeit pills made to look like prescription medication, but actually containing lethal amounts of fentanyl, a common feature of pills purchased on the street. The defense argued that McCall was herself a victim of the opioid epidemic, that her addiction was a disease, and that she loved her son and had not intended for him to die. They presented evidence of her difficult upbringing and previous attempts to get clean, but the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. McCall's addiction, while tragic, did not absolve her of responsibility for her child's safety. She had options. She could have placed AM with family members. She could have sought residential treatment that would have provided care for both of them. She could have at minimum ensured that deadly drugs were not left where a curious toddler could reach them. She had done none of these things. The jury found Kira McCall guilty on all counts. At sentencing, AM's grandmother spoke about the bright, loving boy who had been failed by the system and by his own mother. She described taking him to the park and how he had loved swings. She spoke about his laugh and the way he had just started putting together two-word sentences. All of that potential, extinguished because of pills left on a coffee table. The judge sentenced McCall to 20 to 50 years in prison. He spoke about the epidemic of child deaths related to parental drug use and called for more resources for both addiction treatment and child protection. AM's death sparked renewed debate about the role of Child Protective Services and whether more aggressive intervention is needed in cases involving parental addiction. The CPS worker who had visited the home 3 weeks before AM's death was not personally faulted. She had followed protocols. But the case highlighted gaps in a system that often lacks the resources to provide intensive monitoring of high-risk families. In the Las Vegas community, AM's death became a rallying point for advocates pushing for stronger penalties for adults who expose children to fentanyl and for expanded family treatment programs that can keep children safe while parents receive addiction services. 18 months old, Yim died reaching for what he likely thought was candy, left on a table by a mother too impaired to think about consequences. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction and has children in the home, please reach out for help. Please take a moment to leave a thoughtful comment below. Share this video to raise awareness about crimes against children, and make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Silent Files so you can stay informed about how this case and others like it progress through the legal system. Your engagement helps these stories reach a wider audience and keeps pressure on the system to deliver justice for victims. Case 6. Samantha Rose Paulino. March 11, 2023 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. Fire investigators know that when a residential fire results in a fatality, every detail matters. The time the fire started, the location of ignition, the movement of the victims, the condition of smoke detectors. All of these factors help determine whether a fire was a tragic accident or something more sinister. On March 11, 2023, Las Vegas Fire and Rescue responded to a house fire in a residential neighborhood in the eastern part of the city. Neighbors had called 911 reporting flames visible from the windows of a single-story home. By the time firefighters arrived, the structure was heavily involved. Fire had consumed much of the interior. Once the flames were extinguished, firefighters made a heartbreaking discovery. In a back bedroom, they found the body of a 3-year-old girl. The child, later identified as LP, had died from smoke inhalation. She had been in her bed when the fire started and had never made it out. What immediately struck investigators as suspicious was this. The child's mother, 28-year-old Samantha Rose Paulino, had escaped the fire unharmed. She told arriving firefighters that she had been asleep when the fire started, had woken up to smoke, and had barely escaped herself. She claimed she had tried to reach her daughter's room, but the smoke and flames had been too intense. Fire investigators from Las Vegas Fire and Rescue and LVMPD arson detectives began a meticulous investigation of the scene. They determined that the fire had originated in multiple locations within the home, a pattern inconsistent with an accidental fire. Accelerant-detecting dogs indicated the presence of ignitable liquids in several areas. Laboratory analysis of debris samples confirmed the presence of gasoline. This was arson. Security camera footage from a neighbor's home showed Samantha Paulino leaving her house, getting into her car, and driving away, approximately 15 minutes before the first 911 call about the fire. She had left while the fire was just beginning, giving herself time to establish distance from the scene before discovering the fire and calling for help. Cell phone records confirmed she had been away from the home when she called 911, claiming she had just woken up and escaped. This was a lie. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Paulino's vehicle. In the trunk, they found a gas can with residual gasoline that matched the chemical signature of the accelerant found at the fire scene. They also found her financial records, which revealed a motive. Paulino had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on her daughter and was facing significant debt. During interrogation, Paulino maintained her initial story, that she had been asleep, that she had awakened to find the house on fire, that she had barely escaped and had been unable to save her daughter. But confronted with the evidence, the multiple points of origin, the accelerant, the security footage showing her leaving before the fire, the gas can in her car, her story began to fall apart. She eventually admitted that she had set the fire. She claimed it had been an impulsive act born of financial desperation, that she had not really thought through what she was doing, that she had planned to save her daughter but had panicked when the fire spread faster than she expected. Investigators did not believe this account. The evidence suggested premeditation. The life insurance policy taken out weeks earlier, the purchase of gasoline, the deliberate setting of multiple ignition points to ensure the fire would spread quickly and be difficult to fight. And most damning of all, Paulino had left the house while her daughter slept in her bed, knowing the fire would kill her. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Samantha Rose Paulino with first-degree murder, arson resulting in death, and child abuse. The charges reflected the planned nature of the crime and the particularly cruel method of killing. At trial, fire investigators testified about the burn patterns and accelerant evidence. They explained how the fire had been deliberately set to spread rapidly. Medical examiners testified that LP had died of smoke inhalation. She had likely awakened to smoke and flames, terrified and alone, unable to escape, and unable to understand why her mother did not come to save her. Insurance investigators testified about the policy Paulino had taken out on her daughter, a policy with a substantial death benefit that would have paid out regardless of how the child died. Financial records showed Paulino had been researching how quickly insurance pays out after a child's death. The defense argued that Paulino had been in financial crisis and had made a terrible decision in a moment of desperation. They attempted to present her as someone who had loved her daughter but had been driven to an unthinkable act by debt and pressure. The prosecution demolished this argument. Financial stress does not explain purchasing gasoline, taking out life insurance on a child, setting multiple fires throughout a home, and then leaving while that child sleeps in her bed. These were calculated, cold-blooded actions taken by a mother who valued money more than her daughter's life. The jury found Samantha Rose Paulino guilty on all counts. At sentencing, LP's father, who had been separated from Paulino and had limited custody, spoke about his daughter. She had loved ballet and had just started classes. She had a favorite stuffed rabbit that firefighters had found in the rubble of her room, charred beyond recognition. She had talked about wanting to be a ballerina when she grew up. The judge sentenced Paulino to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus additional consecutive sentences for the arson and child abuse charges. The case sent shockwaves through Las Vegas's insurance industry, leading to more scrutiny of life insurance policies taken out on children and training for agents to recognize red flags. LP's death also led to increased cooperation between fire investigators and homicide detectives in cases where children die in residential fires. The house where LP died was demolished. The lot remains empty, a stark reminder of greed and the ultimate betrayal of parental trust. And if this case affected you, please leave a comment below, like this video, and subscribe to True Crime Silent Files to help spread awareness about these critical issues. Case 7. Danielle Yvonne Slaughter. December 6, 2022 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. Mental health crises can manifest in many ways, but when they result in violence against children, the criminal justice system must balance compassion for the mentally ill with accountability for the harm caused. This balance was tested in one of Las Vegas's most disturbing cases. On the evening of December 6, 2022, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police received a 911 call from a residence in the southeast part of the city. The caller was a man who reported that something terrible had happened, that his stepdaughter had been hurt, and that police needed to come immediately. When officers arrived, they found a scene of horror. A 6-year-old girl, identified in documents as KS, was lying in a bedroom, deceased from apparent stab wounds. Her mother, 31-year-old Danielle Yvonne Slaughter, was in the home covered in blood and behaving erratically. She was taken into custody immediately. KS had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. The medical examiner would later determine she had been stabbed more than 15 times. The attack had been frenzied and sustained. This was not a single impulsive act, but a prolonged assault on a defenseless child. Slaughter's husband, KS's stepfather, told investigators he had been at work when the attack occurred. He had come home to find his stepdaughter dead and his wife in what appeared to be a psychotic state. She had been speaking about demons and evil spirits, claiming she had to save her daughter from possession. Detectives obtained a search warrant and processed the scene. They found evidence of the attack throughout the bedroom, blood spatter patterns consistent with a brutal stabbing, a knife recovered from the scene, and signs of a struggle. KS had tried to defend herself. At 6 years old, she had fought for her life against her own mother. Neighbors reported that in the days leading up to the murder, they had heard Slaughter speaking loudly about religious themes, talking about salvation and demons. One neighbor had seen her outside her home at odd hours, appearing agitated and confused. But no one had called police or social services. They had assumed she was going through a difficult time, not that she posed a danger to her child. During initial questioning, Slaughter's statements were disorganized and delusional. She spoke about needing to save her daughter from evil, about receiving messages from God, about KS being in danger from supernatural forces. She showed no apparent understanding that she had killed her own child. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Danielle Yvonne Slaughter with first-degree murder. However, the case immediately raised questions about her competency to stand trial and her mental state at the time of the offense. Court-appointed psychiatrists evaluated Slaughter. They diagnosed her with severe mental illness, including symptoms consistent with psychotic disorder. However, they determined that with treatment, she could be restored to competency to understand the charges against her and participate in her defense. After months of treatment with antipsychotic medications, Slaughter was deemed competent to stand trial. The legal question then became, was she legally insane at the time of the murder? Under Nevada law, a defendant is legally insane if, at the time of the offense, they did not know the nature and quality of their act or did not know that what they were doing was wrong. This is a high bar. Mental illness alone does not equal legal insanity. At trial, the defense presented extensive psychiatric evidence that Slaughter had been experiencing a complete psychotic break at the time of the murder. Expert witnesses testified that she genuinely believed she was saving her daughter from demonic possession, that she heard voices commanding her to act, and that she did not understand she was killing her child. The prosecution presented its own experts who acknowledged Slaughter's mental illness, but argued that she had demonstrated some awareness that what she was doing was wrong. She had locked doors, she had acted quickly, and she had shown consciousness of guilt afterward. They argued she should be found guilty, but mentally ill. The jury faced an incredibly difficult decision. After days of deliberation, they returned a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder, but with a finding that Slaughter had been suffering from a mental illness at the time. At sentencing, KS's father spoke about his daughter. She had been creative and loved to draw. She had started first grade that fall and was learning to read. She loved her mother and had trusted her completely. That trust had been repaid with violence. The judge sentenced Danielle Yvonne Slaughter to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. She will serve her sentence in a mental health unit within the prison system, where she will continue to receive psychiatric treatment. The case highlighted failures in Nevada's mental health system. Slaughter had a history of mental health issues, but had not been receiving adequate treatment. Family members reported they had tried to get her help, but had encountered barriers. She was an adult who refused treatment, and civil commitment standards are high. Unless someone poses an imminent danger, it's difficult to compel treatment. KS's death led to renewed calls for improved mental health crisis intervention and for more resources to help families dealing with a loved one who is experiencing psychosis but does not meet civil commitment standards. Mental health advocates noted that while Slaughter's case is tragic, the vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent and are more likely to be victims than perpetrators of violence. But when mental illness does intersect with violence against children, the results can be catastrophic. KS was 6 years old. She died afraid and in pain, unable to comprehend why the person she trusted most had turned on her. If you're following along with True Crime Silent Files and want to see more verified cases like this presented with thorough analysis and respect for the victims, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments section below, and subscribe to our channel. We're committed to presenting these cases with accuracy, depth, and respect for everyone affected by these tragedies. Case 8. Jovan Carrillo. October 3, 2023 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. Not every case on this list ended in a child's death, but the ones that didn't often came terrifyingly close. The trauma inflicted on surviving child victims is profound and lasting. Such was the case with Jovan Carrillo and her 11-year-old son. On the evening of October 3, 2023, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police received reports of shots fired at a residence in the central part of the city. When officers arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Neighbors gathered outside, pointing to a house where the shots had originated. Inside, they found an 11-year-old boy suffering from a gunshot wound to the arm and shoulder. He was conscious and able to tell officers what had happened. His mother had shot him. The boy was rushed to University Medical Center with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Surgeons worked to repair damage from the bullet, which had fractured his shoulder bone and damaged soft tissue, but had missed major arteries. He would survive, but he would carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of his life. 34-year-old Jovan Carrillo was found in the home, highly intoxicated, with a handgun nearby. She was taken into custody and transported to the Clark County Detention Center for questioning. As detectives pieced together what had happened, a disturbing picture emerged. Carrillo had been drinking heavily throughout the day. She and her son had gotten into an argument about his refusal to clean his room, a normal parent-child conflict that she had escalated to deadly violence. According to the boy's statement and those of witnesses, Carrillo had retrieved a gun and threatened her son with it during the argument. The boy, terrified, had tried to leave the house. As he ran toward the door, Carrillo had fired the gun, striking him from behind. The shooting appeared to be intentional, not accidental. The safety on the gun had been disengaged, Carrillo had aimed at her son, and she had pulled the trigger. Only the boy's movement as he ran, and perhaps some degree of impairment in Carrillo's aim, had prevented the bullet from striking a more vital area. After shooting her son, Carrillo had made no immediate attempt to call for help. Neighbors had heard the gunshot and the boy's screams and had called 911. When police arrived, Carrillo appeared disoriented and showed little concern for her injured child. The Clark County District Attorney's Office charged Jovan Carrillo with attempted murder, battery with use of a deadly weapon, and child abuse. The attempted murder charge reflected the fact that shooting someone in the torso area can easily be fatal. The fact that the boy survived was fortunate, not proof of any restraint on Carrillo's part. At trial, the now 12-year-old boy testified. In emotional testimony, he described his fear as his mother pointed the gun at him, his desperate attempt to escape, the pain of being shot, and his belief in that moment that he was going to die. He said he loved his mother but that he was afraid of her and did not want to live with her anymore. Medical experts testified about the boy's injuries and his recovery. They noted that he would likely have permanent reduced mobility in his shoulder and would require ongoing physical therapy. Psychologists testified about the trauma of being shot by one's own parent, the profound betrayal of trust, and the likelihood of lasting psychological effects. The defense attempted to portray Carrillo as someone who had made a terrible mistake while intoxicated, someone who had not truly intended to harm her son. They presented evidence of her struggles with alcoholism and argued for charges of reckless endangerment rather than attempted murder. But the prosecution successfully argued that Carrillo's intoxication did not negate intent. She had chosen to drink, she had chosen to retrieve a gun during an argument with her child, and she had chosen to fire that gun at him as he ran away. These were choices, regardless of her level of intoxication. The jury found Jovan Carrillo guilty of attempted murder and child abuse. The battery charge was included in these verdicts. At sentencing, the boy's father spoke about the ongoing impact on his son. The boy now had nightmares. He flinched at loud noises. He had trouble trusting adults. He was receiving therapy but carried the knowledge that his own mother had tried to kill him, a knowledge no child should have to bear. The judge sentenced Carrillo to 20 to 50 years in prison. She would serve the vast majority of her sentence before being eligible for parole, by which time her son would be an adult who had grown up without her. The case sparked discussions about gun safety in homes with children, about the intersection of substance abuse and child endangerment, and about how to identify and intervene with parents who pose a danger to their children before that danger turns deadly. For the boy, now in the care of his father, recovery continues. He survived a wound that could easily have killed him, inflicted by the person who should have been his protector. His physical wounds will heal. The psychological wounds may take a lifetime. Please like this video, leave a comment with your respectful thoughts, and subscribe to True Crime Silent Files. Your engagement helps these crucial stories reach a wider audience and potentially prevents future tragedies. Case 9, Andrea Loving. May 17, 2018, 2nd Judicial District Court, Washoe County. Not all of Nevada's most horrific child victim cases occurred in the Las Vegas area. One of the state's most shocking cases of child abuse and murder happened in the Reno area, in the small community of Cold Springs. On May 17, 2018, deputies from the Washoe County Sheriff's Office responded to a residence in Cold Springs for a report of an unresponsive child. When they arrived, they found a 6-year-old girl, Isabella Loving, in critical condition. She was immediately transported to Renown Regional Medical Center, But despite the efforts of medical staff, she could not be saved. She died later that day. The initial investigation revealed injuries that shocked experienced medical professionals. Isabella had been subjected to prolonged abuse. She was severely malnourished, weighing only 32 pounds when she should have weighed approximately 45 pounds for her age. She had bruising over most of her body, some fresh and some in various stages of healing. She had burns consistent with being held against a hot surface. She had injuries to her head and brain consistent with blunt force trauma. This 6-year-old child had been systematically tortured. Isabella's mother, 25-year-old Andrea Loving, and Loving's boyfriend both lived in the home. As detectives from the Washoe County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit began their investigation, they uncovered a pattern of abuse that had been ongoing for months, possibly years. Neighbors reported they had rarely seen Isabella outside. When they had seen her, she appeared dirty and thin. Some had considered reporting their concerns, but had assumed that CPS must already be involved. A tragic assumption, as it turned out there was no open CPS case on the family. Teachers at Isabella's school reported that she had missed many days of school. When she did attend, she often appeared hungry and would eat everything available at breakfast and lunch. She wore the same clothes repeatedly. She seemed withdrawn and fearful. But the school's reports to CPS had not resulted in substantive intervention. Home visits had been conducted, but Loving had convinced investigators that Isabella's small size was genetic and that she was receiving appropriate care. Forensic evidence from the home told a different story. Investigators found evidence that Isabella had been confined to a closet for extended periods. They found cleaning supplies that had been used to burn her. They found evidence of food in the home, but Isabella had been denied adequate nutrition while her mother and her mother's boyfriend ate normally. During interrogation, Andrea Loving initially claimed that Isabella had fallen and hurt herself. But confronted with the extensive medical evidence, the pattern of old and new injuries, the malnutrition, the burns, she eventually admitted that she and her boyfriend had disciplined Isabella harshly because she was difficult. Further investigation revealed that Isabella had not been biologically related to Loving's boyfriend, and that Loving had begun to view her daughter as an impediment to her relationship. Text messages between Loving and her boyfriend showed them discussing their frustration with Isabella and their methods of punishment. The Washoe County District Attorney's Office charged both Andrea Loving and her boyfriend with first-degree murder and child abuse. The murder charge reflected the sustained nature of the abuse and the fact that the fatal injuries had been inflicted knowingly. At trial, medical experts provided heartbreaking testimony about Isabella's condition. They explained that she had been starved to the point that her body was consuming its own muscle for energy. They described the pain she would have experienced from the burns and beatings. They testified that she had likely suffered for months. Teachers testified through tears about the little girl who had loved to draw and who had shared her artwork with them. They expressed guilt that they had not done more to help her, though prosecutors emphasized that the teachers had made reports and had done what they could within the system's limitations. The defense attempted to shift primary blame to Loving's boyfriend, portraying Andrea Loving as someone who had been intimidated into allowing the abuse. But evidence proved this was false. Loving had participated actively in the abuse, and as Isabella's mother, she had a legal duty to protect her daughter. She had failed that duty catastrophically. The jury found Andrea Loving guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse. At sentencing, Isabella's father, who had not been part of her life, spoke about his regret. He described how he had tried to maintain contact, but had been blocked by Loving. He wondered if his daughter would be alive if he had fought harder for custody. The judge sentenced Andrea Loving to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his sentencing remarks, he spoke about the particular cruelty of a mother abusing her own child and the trust society places in parents to care for vulnerable children. Loving's boyfriend received the same sentence. Isabella's death led to significant changes in how Washoe County Child Protective Services handles cases of suspected abuse. The agency implemented new protocols requiring more thorough investigation of malnutrition cases and requiring medical examinations when teachers report concerns about a child's weight or appearance. The school district also implemented mandatory training for teachers and staff on recognizing and reporting child abuse, with an emphasis on trusting their instincts even when parents provide explanations for concerning signs. Isabella Loving was 6 years old. She loved to draw. She smiled at her teachers, even when she was hungry and hurt. She deserved to be protected. Instead, she died at the hands of the person who brought her into the world. Case 10. Christiane Alt. January 12, 2024 8th Judicial District Court, Clark County. Our final case is recent and ongoing at the time of this production. It represents another horrifying example of a mother failing to protect, and indeed, actively harming, her own children. On January 12, 2024, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police received a report that would initiate one of the most disturbing investigations of the year. A teenage victim had disclosed to school counselors that she had been subjected to ongoing abuse and sexual exploitation by adults in her home, including her own mother. Detectives from the Crimes Against Children section immediately began an investigation. What they uncovered was a pattern of abuse involving 37-year-old Christiane Alt and multiple children under her care. According to investigative reports that have been made public through court filings, Alt is accused of child abuse and lewd acts with children under 14 years of age. The specific allegations are too disturbing to detail in full here, but they involve the systematic abuse and exploitation of vulnerable children who were dependent on Alt for care. Search warrants executed at Alt's residence yielded electronic evidence, computers, phones, and storage devices that investigators say contained evidence of the alleged abuse. Forensic analysis of these devices is ongoing, and additional charges may be forthcoming. The Clark County District Attorney's Office has charged Christiane Alt with multiple counts of child abuse and lewdness with a child under 14. Given that this case is still working its way through the court system, we cannot provide full details about the allegations or evidence, as doing so could compromise the prosecution's case. What we can say is this: the charges against Alt represent a profound betrayal of the trust placed in parents and caregivers. Children are entitled to safety, nurture, and protection from the adults responsible for them. When those adults instead become perpetrators of abuse, the harm inflicted goes far beyond the physical. It fundamentally damages a child's ability to trust and to form healthy relationships. Alt has entered a plea of not guilty and is being held in the Clark County Detention Center pending trial. Her defense attorneys have indicated they will vigorously contest the charges. The case is expected to go to trial in late 2025. The victims in this case face a long road to recovery. Child psychologists who work with abuse survivors note that recovery is possible, but it requires intensive, specialized therapeutic intervention. The children removed from Alt's care are receiving this support through the county's child welfare system and through nonprofit organizations that specialize in helping child abuse survivors. This case has prompted renewed scrutiny of how background checks are conducted for adults working with or caring for children, and how schools and community members can better recognize and report signs of abuse. Because this case is ongoing and involves minor victims whose identities are protected, we cannot provide more specific details. What we can do is reiterate the importance of vigilance and the responsibility we all share to protect children. If a child discloses abuse to you, believe them. Listen without judgment. These cases from Nevada reveal a disturbing reality. Some of the most serious crimes against children happened inside their own homes. Each case is real, verified, and documented, involving mothers who violated the trust placed in them. Together, they serve as a reminder of the importance of awareness, early intervention, and protecting vulnerable children before tragedy occurs. 10 cases. 10 mothers who failed the most fundamental test of parenthood, protecting their children. Some killed in moments of rage or panic. Others tortured their victims over extended periods. Some were motivated by money, others by mental illness, still others by addiction or selfishness. But regardless of motivation, the outcome was the same. Children who deserved love and protection received violence and betrayal instead. These cases from Nevada represent a broader national crisis. Every year, hundreds of children die from abuse and neglect at the hands of parents and caregivers. Thousands more survive but carry physical and emotional scars that will last a lifetime. What can we learn from these tragedies? First, that community vigilance matters. In several of these cases, neighbors, teachers, or other community members noticed warning signs but did not report them or did not push hard enough when their initial reports were not acted upon. If you see something concerning, A child who is dirty, hungry, covered in bruises, or fearful, please report it. You might be wrong, but if you're right, you could save a life. Second, that our systems for protecting children need continued improvement and adequate funding. Child protective services agencies across the country are understaffed and underfunded. Social workers carry impossibly high caseloads. The system is designed to keep families together when possible, which is usually the right goal, but sometimes means children are left in dangerous situations too long. We need to invest in child welfare if we expect it to work. Third, that resources for struggling parents must be available and accessible. Mental health services, addiction treatment, financial assistance, parenting education. These resources exist, but too often parents in crisis do not know how to access them or face barriers to getting help. Making these resources more available and reducing stigma around asking for help could prevent some tragedies. Finally, that we must hold accountable those who harm children. The mothers featured in these cases made choices, horrific, unforgivable choices, and they rightly face consequences for those choices. Justice for child victims matters, both for the specific children harmed and as a broader societal statement that we value and protect the vulnerable. The children whose stories we've told today deserve better. They deserve to grow up, to go to school, to play with friends, to pursue their dreams. That opportunity was stolen from them by the people who should have cherished them most. We remember them. We speak their stories. And we commit to doing better as a society to protect the children who remain vulnerable today. Thank you for watching this episode of True Crime Silent Files. I know these cases are difficult to hear, but they're important stories that need to be told. If this video provided value and you want to see more deep dive true crime documentaries focusing on cases that shaped communities and changed laws, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on how we as a society can better protect vulnerable children. What policies would you like to see implemented? What changes would make a difference? And if you found this content informative and respectful to the victims, a like helps this video reach more viewers who care about justice and child safety. Remember, if you suspect a child is being abused, report it. Your call could save a life. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next investigation. This has been True Crime Silent Files.